I have had a really crazy month, not in part to do with the fact that I'm being audited by the IRS. Have any of you been audited by the IRS? Evidently, you haven't really arrived as a clergy until you've been audited by the IRS. I have a really wonderful tax accountant who has minimized our loss, and we've been working really closely on it, but it has been quite traumatic. So the other day I was at his office for yet one more scouring, one more looking through credit card receipts, yellow highlights, adding it up, finding little receipts out of my wallet, uncrumpling them, passing them away. And at the end of the conversation, we called the IRS person, whose name was Chantel. I'm going to say just in case she's probably not watching. But anyway, Chantel is about to have babies, and she wants to wrap this up before she goes away to have her twins. Now, I have cast Chantel in my mind as an ogre, because you need an enemy when you're having, come on, you just need one. I'm like, I don't even know what she looks like, but she's the devil, is what I've kind of, I just have decided that, just so I can have a good oppositional identity experience. Anyway, at the end of this meeting, the accountant says, let's give Chantel a call, like they're best friends, and she wants to hear your voice, and okay. So we call Chantel, and she's like, hi, Reverend Lewis. Could you explain to me what a sabbatical is? What is a sabbatical? She thought it was a big honeymoon or something. So I had to explain to her that it was a leave to go work on my book, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Fine, she says. Thanks for explaining that. I'm so proud of the work that you and your husband do in the world, and we're so delighted to be able to reduce your tax burden. It's just going to be so lovely. What? Are you talking about, devil woman? What? No. She's just as nice as pie. Just as nice as pie. And I'm thinking, how did that happen? So Frank hangs up the phone, and he's kind of a little, he's an old guy, 73. When I'm 73, I won't be old, but he's old. Little man, soft guy, skin, little loose. He says, I just had to schmooze her and just tell her how wonderful you guys were. I'm like, how did you know how to do that? He says, Jacqui, I wake up every day. Every day I wake up. And before I put my feet on the ground, I tell myself there's going to be 10 really good things that are going to happen to me. 10 good things are going to happen to me that day. And he said, and then I say, God, help me to see the first one. Someday, Jacqui, I'll tell you how I got there. And I'm putting my hat on, and I'm making leaving feeling sounds, But something drew me back. And I said, no, tell me now. So Frank tells me, that he was a medic in Vietnam. And he served his country for 2 tours of duty. And that every day, in order to walk out onto the battlefield and collect body parts, he made a cocktail in his canteen of ethyl alcohol and Tang. He and all the guys did that. And he says, and Jacqui, we wouldn't hang out with the druggies. Because if you hung out with the druggies, they could lean up against a tree and just die right there. No. But all of us would take our canteen cocktail, go on the battlefield, do what we had to do, come home, pass out, wake up the next morning, and do it again. When he got back to America, he was an alcoholic with PTSD. And his wife left him. And so he was just destitute and just living in the streets and just having the most miserable life. He used his GI Bill to send himself back to school, and he went to school and he became an accountant. He says that he went to his first AA meeting on his father's birthday, November 18th, 1967. And about 10 years later, on October 10th, at 10 o'clock in the morning, he found a meeting so that he wouldn't take a drink. It was his 10th wedding anniversary. And he went to a bank, and he took his check to cash it. And he just stood there praying the whole time, God, let the meeting be enough. Don't let me drink today. Don't let me drink today. He looked at the clock. He saw the time. He started crying, tears just dripping down his face. And then suddenly he heard a crash. He heard a big crash. And he looked around, and some man had just fallen splat on the bank floor. Bank floors are not soft. So this man had fallen and literally cracked his head wide open. And Frank turned around to look at the man to see what he could do, and he started praying again. He said, I don't want to be the first responder. I don't want to be the first responder. I don't want to be the first responder. But sure enough, he was the first one there. The guy is about to seize. Frank says to someone, give me a yardstick, and he sticks the yardstick in his mouth. Don't do that, y'all, unless you're trained. He sticks the yardstick in the guy's mouth. He stops him from seizing, and he begins to give him CPR. The guy is turning from light blue to dark blue to black, with Frank beating on his chest, just banging on his chest. He said, I banged on him so hard that a woman next to me said, leave him alone. He's dead. Just let it be. But Frank kept pounding, and he pounded, and he pounded, and he pounded, and the man's color began to come back. And he went from black to navy blue again, to light blue, and then he started sputtering, and then he started breathing, and then he was alive. So Frank, who is hilarious, said to the teller, do I have to stand at the back of the line, or did I earn? Yeah, you can go first, sir. Thanks for saving his life. He left the scene and went outside and just wept. He said, tears of thanksgiving, that the terrible day that would have been his 10th anniversary then became forever the day that he was in the right place to save that man's life. Wow. Every day, Frank says, I look for 10 good things. I ask God to show me the first one, and I know the rest are going to come. Now, what's that got to do with that crazy text that Carlos just read? It's crazy. Revelation is a crazy book. It's a crazy book. It's a crazy book prompted by a vision that a man named John had, where he really believed that Jesus told him to write this letter to 7 churches to let them know that things were absolutely never going to be the same again. So John is a seer, a revealer, an apocalyptic prophet who's writing about end times and pulling back the cover on what he believes to be the thing that God is doing. Like all of the believers in John's day, John was persecuted, overwhelmed, distraught, destroyed, beleaguered, and persecuted for his faith. And in the midst of the terrible, horrible, how many of you have read the book of Revelation ever? How many of you have picked it up and put it down quite quickly? Beasts and wild noises and crazy symbolic things. In the middle of all of that, he actually pauses to show a picture of the church. And that's the text that Carlos read for us so beautifully. He sees a great multitude of people, multi-culti, multi-ethnic, multi-class, multilingual, many sexual orientations, all of these people, some of them Jewish people, some of them Greek people, some of them so-called new Christian people, some of them pagan people, all of them in his vision become the people who are in their diversity praising God in one voice. In one voice, they're worshiping God, one God alone. By the time they're worshiping God in this text, John is now not talking about them worshiping the Lamb who symbolizes Jesus, just God who is God all over the place in many different ways. So whether they're Muslim or Jewish or Christian or meditating or doing yoga, or they're Baha'i, or they're atheists or agnostic, they're all praising God in one voice. This multicultural multitude of people praising God is the telos, the end, the ultimate end of God's plan for humanity, is what John is saying. And it doesn't matter how we get there, he's saying we're going to get there together. And it's a promise that wakes him up in the morning. Friends, it's a promise that wakes me up in the morning. This multitude has been through, the text says, the tribulation. and I'm just going to read backwards on it, that some of them, like Frank, have been to Vietnam and survived that, been to Afghanistan and Iraq and survived that, been to Chicago on the South Side and survived that, been in Ferguson in the midst of racial craziness and survived that, been put out of churches and survived that, invited back home and survived that, shunned by families and friends and survived that. They've been through the mess and survived that. Suffered the Holocaust, suffered the enslavement of Africans, suffered the taking of lands and language, been stolen off shores, and survived that, John sees. And now they stand in one voice with their robes washed in the blood of the Lamb. Now, we don't talk about blood that much at Middle Church, but the language of the day would have been to a people who were martyrs. You know what I mean? People who were wrestling with, on behalf of the faith, and actually getting killed in action, KIA. But the way that John is using this, he's saying that those folks, the redeemed ones, the big multiculti multitude, have all been actively participating in the work that God is doing through the Lamb. All of them actively participating in the work that God is doing to heal the world. I want you to go there with me and picture the kaleidoscope of butterflies that were in the social hall this morning. Did you see them? It was like a little congregation out there. All of them participating in the work that God is doing to redeem God's people. These 50 people who practice for no pay on Thursday nights so they can bring some joy in this place, all of them in the multicultural multitude of people working on behalf of the Lamb. Last week, the people who worked with the children in the Freedom School, the teenagers that working on the crowd, the one who wrote the crowd, all of those people, Darren Johnston, where are you? Coaching and pushing and shoving and encouraging and teaching the children that they were worth something, working in the project of God to heal the world. All of you folding bulletins and working in the garden and making phone calls and caring for the sick and praying for the lost and letting us know when someone feels disenfranchised. All of you raising children and loving each other and saying a good word and standing in for the lost. All of you are in the great multitude of the people working on the project called Healing the World. What's that got to do with Frank? I'm not sure if Frank goes to church, but he is a man of immense faith who believes every day that God is going to shower him with blessings. And because that's what he believes, that's what he sees. Frank, like John, is a seer. Frank, like John, is a revealer. I promise you, I can't remember the last time I heard a sermon preached quite like the one I heard in his office. Just a simple, anecdotal message that says if you see it, you can believe it, and if you can believe it, you can do it. And if we can envision it, we can actually heal the world. So it turns out that this sermon is not about lambs and blood. This is a sermon about seeing. It's a sermon about spiritual ethical leadership. And to tell you that spiritual ethical leaders are not necessarily the ones that go to seminary. They're not necessarily the ones who are trained professional voices, although that's fabulous. They are not necessarily the ones who feel called by God to go into ministry. They are ordinary folks just like you, sitting in the pews, hoping to hear a word that matters, and called by God to take into the world a vision of 10 good things, or 5 renewing things, or 1 healing thing. One thing that you can see, that you can do, that you will know will make a difference, that'll play it forward. 1 kindness to that crazy heifer on the subway who keeps spitting on you while she's asking for money. Or one act of generosity to the person that you walk by every day with the cardboard sign, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, use this energy to get a job. But instead, you decide to go ahead and give them that $5 bill and hope that they'll buy a sandwich instead of a fifth. Or it's the child that you know in the neighborhood who just needs someone to pay attention to her, to know that she's all right because she lives in a house where they say no too much. Or the person that is on your absolute last nerve, and justifiably you don't owe them anything, except that you're a child of God, and you know that God's mercies are new every morning, and you know you're the one to pass it on. The Middle Project is about preparing ethical leaders for a more just society. A Middle Church is about preparing ethical leaders for a more just society. Day in and day out, every day, a word, a song, a prayer, a hug, a touch that says, we're in this together. And God needs all of us to make it happen. Every morning, Jacqui, I put my feet on the ground, and I know 10 good things are going to happen. And I ask God to just show me the first one. Just show me the first one. Let's show each other the first one. Together, we will heal our world. Amen.